Before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from by leaving a comment below. If you enjoy this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a wonderful day. Enjoy the story, everyone. Aria Bennett placed the small cake on the kitchen table as if it were a treasure. It was just a bakery treat, the kind wrapped in cheap plastic. But to her, it meant the whole world. She pulled a crooked candle out of her pocket, something she found in the emergency drawer, stuck it in the pink frosting, and sat at the huge white marble table that seemed like it was never used. Her boss's apartment, Ethan Harlow's, was luxurious, quiet, and intimidating. But that night, the kitchen felt like it was hers alone. She sighed, lit the candle with a borrowed lighter, and whispered, "Happy birthday, Aria." 28 years old. A crooked candle and not a single present. So glamorous. She closed her eyes, ready to make a wish. But before she could blow the candle out, a chill ran down her spine, a strange feeling, like someone was watching her. Slowly, she opened her eyes, and her heart nearly jumped out of her chest. There he was, standing in the kitchen doorway. Ethan Harlow, her boss. Impeccable suit, serious expression, leather briefcase in hand. The man looked like a statue of ice that suddenly decided to come to life at the most embarrassing moment possible. Aria froze in her chair. She swallowed hard. "Mr. Harlow." Her voice cracked. "I was just, testing the fire alarm system." His eyes slowly moved down to the little cake with the lit candle. The silence in the kitchen was so heavy she could hear her own heart beating fast. For a second, she imagined the worst. Would she be fired? Kicked out for daring to use the kitchen to blow out a birthday candle? But then he spoke. That deep, firm voice that usually intimidated executives in boardrooms echoed in an unexpected way. "May I sit with you?" Aria blinked. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. Did she hear that right? "What?" she stammered. "May I sit with you?" Ethan repeated, as if he were proposing a company merger instead of offering to share a cheap piece of cake. Aria swallowed hard again. Sure. She mumbled nervously, "But just so you know, you'll have to share the cake." "May I sit with you?" Ethan repeated, as if he were proposing a company merger instead of offering to share a cheap piece of cake. Her boss's apartment, Ethan Harlow's, was luxurious, quiet, and intimidating. The contrast was almost comical. He pulled out a chair and sat next to her. The silence lasted a few seconds. Aria tried to break it. "So, it's my birthday, 28 years old. And guess what? 0 gifts." He pulled out a chair and sat next to her. Ethan turned his face toward her. His eyes were serious, but there was something there. An unexpected curiosity. Aria tried to break it. "May I sit with you?" Ethan repeated, as if he were proposing a company merger instead of offering to share a cheap piece of cake. "May I sit with you?" Ethan repeated, as if he were proposing a company merger instead of offering to share a cheap piece of cake. He pulled out a chair and sat next to her. He just kept looking at the candle. Finally, in a low tone, he said, "That's going to change." Aria laughed nervously, still trying to hide the fear from being caught in such a personal moment. "It's going to change," she repeated, raising an eyebrow. "And don't start with those motivational speeches like age is just a number." Ethan Harlow, the cold and distant millionaire, side by side with the clumsy, funny nanny in front of a tiny cake with a candle already melting sideways. Ethan stood up, adjusted his jacket, and picked up his briefcase. Not even a pair of worn-out socks. Aria stayed there, seated, staring at the door. The candle's flame flickered in front of her, and her breathing was still fast. He didn't answer. This man talks like a movie trailer. Tomorrow. What? Money's going to rain down? He'll show up with a 3-tier cake? She laughed to herself, nervous. But deep down, curious, she blew out the candle, took a bite of the cake, and thought, I bet it's going to be something so strange I'll never forget. What she didn't know was that she was right. The next day, Ethan Harlow would show up with a gift so unexpected and unusual that it would forever change the way she saw him. The next morning, Aria woke up earlier than usual, not because she wanted to, but because her mind just wouldn't stop wondering what Ethan meant with that mysterious tomorrow. Would he really give her a present? Or was it just another one of those cryptic phrases rich men like to say to sound interesting? She went downstairs in the mansion, still in her pajamas, dragging her slippers across the cold marble floor. The house was as silent as ever. She walked into the kitchen yawning, her messy hair looking like a bird's nest on top of her head. She opened the fridge, looking for the orange juice. when she heard firm footsteps behind her. She turned around quickly and almost dropped the bottle from her hands. Ethan was standing there, impeccable gray suit, hair slicked back, standing tall, and in his hands something small and green. Arya blinked several times, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. It was a tiny plant, a little succulent in a white pot, and worst of all, it had a huge, ridiculous blue ribbon tied around it, the kind that looked like it was made by a 5-year-old during arts and crafts. For a second, Arya was completely silent. Then laughter burst out of her like a confetti bomb. Oh my goodness. And worst of all, it had a huge, ridiculous blue ribbon tied around it, the kind that looked like it was made by a 5-year-old during arts and crafts. Is this a birthday gift or an offering for some secret millionaire ritual? Ethan stood still, holding the plant with the same seriousness he'd used to sign a $1 million contract. His expression didn't change, but Arya could swear she saw a slight blush creeping up his cheeks. It's a gift, Ethan said, handing the plant to her. Arya wiped the tears from laughing and gently took the pot, still grinning from ear to ear. Really? A succulent? With a blue bow that looks like it survived a hurricane. Ethan adjusted his tie, clearly uncomfortable. He cleared his throat before answering. Really? A succulent? With a blue bow that looks like it survived a hurricane. The clerk suggested roses, but I thought that was too much. So, you picked a plant that looks like a toy cactus. Arya wiped the tears from laughing and gently took the pot, still grinning from ear to ear. Succulents are resilient. He cleared his throat before answering. Arya bit her lip to keep from laughing again. They're practical. Wow. He cleared his throat before answering. They're practical. Arya wiped the tears from laughing and gently took the pot, still grinning from ear to ear. They're practical. Wow. That's not what I meant, he murmured, rubbing the back of his neck. Arya set the plant on the counter and smiled. This time more warmly. Actually, it's sweet in a strange and totally you kind of way. But it's sweet. He cleared his throat before answering. I'm just teasing, she said, softening her tone. Actually, it's sweet in a strange and totally you kind of way. But it's sweet. It was curiosity. Maybe even something more. Why did you do this? Arya asked, tilting her head. I mean, really, you barely talked to me except about Theo. He cleared his throat before answering. Ethan hesitated. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. He seemed to be fighting an inner battle. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. And suddenly you show up with a gift. Something about you is different. Arya felt her heart skip a beat. She wasn't expecting that, or the sincerity in his voice. Different, how? She asked, trying to keep her tone light. Different like she wears flamingo print slippers in my house, or different like she's not afraid to mess with me. Ethan almost smiled. Almost both. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was new. Something Arya didn't quite know how to read. Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back like he suddenly remembered something important. I have to go. Meeting at 8, he said, returning to his usual professional tone. Of course, Arya nodded, still holding the pot. Thanks for the succulent. I'm going to name it Ethenrico. Ethan stopped at the door and turned slightly. Ethenrico? Yes, he looks like an Ethenrico. Serious, formal, but with a ridiculous bow that ruins everything. At this time, Ethan actually smiled. It was quick, almost invisible, but Arya saw it, and it made her happier than she expected. He left the kitchen without another word, and Arya stood there looking at the little plant like it was the most precious thing in the world. Well, Ethenrico, looks like you and I are going to be great friends, she murmured. Gently touching one of the leaves, Ethan cleared his throat and stepped back like he suddenly remembered something important. She was about to head upstairs to get Theo ready when something on the floor caught her eye. It was a folder, black leather, with the initials EH engraved in gold. Arya frowned. Ethan must have dropped it without noticing. I'm going to name it Ethenrico. Oh no, she muttered, kneeling to gather them. Then her eyes landed on a specific document. The words at the top made her freeze. Petition for shared custody modification. Theodore Ethan Harlow. Arya read the title twice to make sure she was seeing it right. Shared custody. Theo. Her eyes moved quickly through the text. Names came up. Vivian Lang, Theo's maternal grandmother. Legal arguments. Phrases like emotional absence of the father and unsuitable environment for healthy child development. Arya's heart sank. Was Ethan about to lose custody of Theo? Or at least part of it? Suddenly, a lot of things started to make sense. Ethan's constant tension, the way he avoided staying home too long, the way he sometimes looked at his son like he was afraid of doing something wrong. Arya quickly gathered the papers and put them back in the folder. Her hands were trembling slightly. She shouldn't have seen that. It wasn't her business. Her hands were trembling slightly. She shouldn't have seen that. But now that she knew, she couldn't just forget it. She knocked on Ethan's office door, but there was no answer. She placed the folder right in the center of his desk, where he would see it as soon as he came back. As she turned to leave, she looked out the office window. Down by the mansion entrance, Ethan was getting into the black car. She placed the folder right in the center of his desk, where he would see it as soon as he came back. As she turned to leave, she looked out the office window. As she turned to leave, she looked out the office window. "Something's going on here," she murmured to herself. "And I have a feeling things are about to get a lot more complicated." She left the office and gently closed the door. In the hallway, she heard Theo's voice calling from his room. "Arya, Arya, can you help me find my blue dinosaur?" She took a deep breath, pushing the troubling thoughts away, and put a smile back on her face. "Coming, Theo. I bet he's hiding under the bed again." But as she walked to the boy's room, the image of those documents wouldn't leave her mind. When she entered the room, Theo was on his knees, reaching under the bed with one arm stretched out. "He has to be here," Theo mumbled, his voice muffled. "I always leave him under my pillow," but he ran away again. Arya smiled and knelt down beside him. "Dinosaur don't run away, Theo. They don't have fast legs. Yours probably got stuck somewhere." After a few minutes of searching, Arya found the toy wedged between the headboard and the wall. "Found the runaway," she announced, lifting the blue dinosaur like it was a trophy. Theo jumped with joy and hugged the toy to his chest. "Thanks, Arya. You're the best." She ruffled his hair gently. "Of course I am. Now go brush your teeth and get changed. We're doing something fun today." "What is it?" Theo's eyes lit up. "It's a surprise, but it involves paint, paper, and a lot of mess." Theo ran to the bathroom excited. Arya stayed there for a moment, looking around the room. It was perfectly neat, full of expensive educational toys. But something was missing. It lacked life. It lacked mess. But something was missing. It lacked life. It was perfectly neat, full of expensive educational toys. Arya made a decision right then. She wasn't going to say anything about what she had seen. It wasn't the time. But she would do everything she could to show that this house, no matter how cold it looked, had love, and that Ethan, no matter how distant he seemed, deserved a chance. Later, in the living room, Arya spread large sheets of paper on the floor along with jars of paint in every color. She wasn't going to say anything about what she had seen. "Today we're doing handprint paintings," Arya announced, dipping her hand into the red paint and pressing it onto the paper. "Oh no," she murmured. Theo laughed and copied her, choosing the green paint. "I'm making a giant dragon." "Dragons don't live in zoos, Theo. They do in mine." Arya laughed and kept painting. That's when she heard the front door open. Ethan was back earlier than expected. She looked at her paint-covered hands, at Theo, all messy and green and yellow, and at the living room that looked like a colorful tornado had passed through. "Oh no," she murmured. She looked at her paint-covered hands, at Theo, all messy and green and yellow, and at the living room that looked like a colorful tornado had passed through. Arya laughed and kept painting. Arya braced herself for a scolding, but then had an idea. "Mr. Harlow, glad you're here," she said, standing up and leaving red paint marks on the floor. "We need one more person for the project." Ethan blinked. "Project?" "Yes, we're creating a modern art mural." Arya picked up a brush and offered it to him. "Theo's doing the dragons. I'm working on the elephants. And you can do, I don't know, something serious and executive, like a pie chart." Theo dropped the paintbrush and ran over to his father, grabbing the hem of his jacket with paint-stained hands. "Daddy, you have to make a shark, please." Ethan looked at his son, then at Arya, and finally at the paintbrush in her hand. He seemed to be having an internal battle. "I have work," he said, hesitating. "Work can wait 10 minutes, Arya insisted, still holding out the brush. "Come on, Mr. Harlow. Show us you know how to have fun." For a moment, Arya thought he'd refuse and head straight to his office. But then, something unexpected happened. Ethan let out a long sigh, took off his jacket, placed his briefcase on the couch, and took the brush from Arya's hand. 10 minutes, he said, kneeling next to Theo. Arya had to bite her lip, not to scream with joy. Ethan dipped the brush into the blue paint and started drawing something that was supposed to be a shark, but looked more like a sausage with teeth. "Daddy, that shark looks weird," Theo said, trying not to laugh. "It's a stylized shark," Ethan answered. "Serious." Arya couldn't hold it in and burst out laughing. "Stylized? That looks like a killer sausage." Even Ethan gave a slight smile. It was brief, but it was there. The three of them kept painting, and for the first time, Arya saw Ethan relax. He laughed at Theo's jokes, asked silly questions about colors, and even let his son put a star on the sleeve of his white shirt. When the 10 minutes were up, Ethan stood up and looked at his hands covered in blue paint. He seemed surprised with himself. "Thank you, Arya," he said, his voice softer. "For what?" she asked, genuinely curious. Ethan looked at Theo, who was now drawing a giant yellow sun in the corner of the paper. "For this," he said, gesturing toward the colorful mess. For making him smile like that, Arya felt a tightness in her chest. In that moment, she understood that Ethan wasn't cold by choice. He simply didn't know how to connect, and he was trying to learn. "You're welcome," she said, smiling. "But next time you'll have to improve that shark. It looks more like an inflatable pool fish." Ethan shook his head, almost laughing, and went upstairs to change clothes. The rest of the day went by quickly. Arya made dinner, helped Theo with his bath, and tidied up the living room, which still had paint splatters in some corners. That night, after putting Theo to bed, Arya went down to the living room with a cup of tea. She sat on the couch and picked up the Uno deck Theo had left on the coffee table. She was shuffling the cards absent-mindedly when Ethan came down the stairs. He was in casual clothes now, sweatpants and a gray t-shirt. Arya had never seen him like that. He looked more human, less like a corporate robot. "Want to play?" Arya offered, holding up the deck. Ethan hesitated, but ended up sitting in the armchair next to her. "I haven't played Uno in years. It's not rocket science. You just discard cards." Arya started dealing, and just so you know, I'm unbeatable. They played a few rounds in silence. Arya kept winning, and Ethan looked genuinely focused like he was in a business negotiation. "You take this very seriously," Arya said, laying down a +4. Ethan picked up 4 cards without complaint. "I take everything seriously," he noticed. Arya played another card. "But you know, sometimes it's okay to just be human. Mess up the shark, lose at Uno, let life happen." Ethan looked at her, curious. "Do you always say what you think?" "Always. It's both a flaw and a virtue." Then Arya, without really thinking, blurted out loud while looking at her cards. "Playing with you is like playing with a soulless robot. Seriously, even Ethenrico has more emotion and he's a plant." Silence. Arya froze. She slowly lifted her eyes and saw Ethan looking straight at her. Not angry, not cold. He was laughing. It wasn't a loud laugh, but it was real. "Something's going on here," she murmured to herself. "Soulless robot." Ethan repeated, still laughing. Arya turned red. I didn't mean to say that out loud." "But you did." It slipped. Ethan stopped laughing, but the smile stayed. "That's funny. Theo said something similar last week. Theo called you a robot. He said, I was like those action figures that can't bend their arm." Arya bit her lip, trying not to laugh, but she couldn't help it. The laugh came out, and soon both of them were laughing together. When the laughter finally died down, Ethan rested his elbows on his knees and looked at Arya with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You're right," he said quietly. "I'm kind of a robot sometimes. Kind of." "You're right," he said quietly. Ethan smiled again, and in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't just boss and employee anymore. It was something else. Something Arya couldn't quite name yet. But it made her heart feel a little lighter. They went back to the game, and this time, Ethan seemed more relaxed. He made bad jokes about the cards, complained whenever Arya played a +2, and even celebrated when he finally won a round. When the clock struck midnight, Arya yawned and stood up. "I think it's time to sleep. Tomorrow, Theo's going to want to make more colorful messes." Ethan nodded and put the cards back in the box. "Thank you, Arya, for today." "You already said that." She smiled. "But you're welcome again." She went upstairs and before entering her room, looked back. Ethan was still in the living room staring at the art wall they had made earlier. He gently touched the poorly drawn shark and smiled to himself. Arya entered the room with a smile on her face. Maybe, just maybe, that cold and distant man was beginning to melt. In the days that followed, something changed in the house's routine. Ethan started coming home earlier from work. Not very early, but just enough to have dinner with Theo before bedtime. Arya noticed he was making a real effort to be present, even if he still seemed awkward during family moments. That Thursday, Ethan came home at 6:30. Arya was in the living room helping Theo with a dinosaur puzzle when she heard the front door open. "Daddy," Arya noticed he was making a real effort to be present, even if he still seemed awkward during family moments. Theo dropped the pieces and ran to his father, who picked him up. "How was your day?" "Arya taught me how to make paper airplanes. Look." Theo pointed to several planes scattered around the room, some hanging from the chandelier. Ethan looked at Arya, who gave a shrug with an innocent smile. "Contemporary art. It's an installation about freedom and movement." "Of course it is," Ethan replied in a tone Arya could swear was disguised amusement. "Daddy, are you going to eat dinner with us tonight?" Theo asked hopefully. "I am. Actually, I'm going to make dinner tonight." Arya raised her eyebrows, surprised. "You cook?" "It's not a big deal. I'm just going to heat up a lasagna." Ethan sat Theo down. "I have a frozen one in the fridge." Arya crossed her arms, skeptical. "You know how to use the oven, right?" "Of course I do." Ethan loosened his tie. "I'm not completely useless in the kitchen." "If you say so," Arya muttered, turning back to the puzzle with Theo. Ethan walked into the kitchen with confident steps. Arya stayed in the living room but kept an ear out. She heard the fridge door open, something being torn, and then the microwave beeping. A few minutes later, she heard Ethan mumble something unclear, then more beeping, then more muttering. Arya looked at Theo. "I think I better go see what's going on." When she entered the kitchen, she found Ethan standing in front of the microwave, staring at the display with a confused expression. "What's the problem?" Arya asked, coming closer. "I put the lasagna in to heat up, but the time isn't moving." Ethan pressed more buttons. "This thing must be broken." Arya peeked through the microwave window and held her breath. The lasagna was still in the aluminum container. "Ethan," she said, trying to stay calm, "did you put the lasagna in with the foil still on?" "Yes." "So what?" "So what?" "Foil and microwaves don't go together." Arya quickly opened the door and took out the container. "This could explode." "Explode?" Ethan frowned. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting?" "You almost turned the kitchen into an action scene." Arya took the lasagna out of the foil and placed it on a proper plate. Who would have thought a tech CEO doesn't know how to use a microwave? Ethan crossed his arms, clearly embarrassed. "I always eat out or order delivery. I don't need to cook." "Well, today you're going to learn." Arya put the plate in the microwave and set the timer. 6 minutes, and no metal in there ever. They stood side by side, watching the plate turn inside the microwave. The silence was broken by a small popping sound from inside, followed by a spark. Arya's eyes widened. What was that? Another pop, then a bright light, and suddenly the microwave started making a strange noise like it was groaning in pain. "Step back." Arya pulled Ethan away. The machine gave one last dramatic wheeze and let out a puff of white smoke from the door. The display blinked 3 times and went completely dark. Silence. Arya and Ethan stood there staring at the dead microwave. "You killed the microwave," Arya said, stunned. "I didn't do anything." Ethan defended himself. "You're the one who said it, but you're the one who put foil in it before. You probably fried the system. That doesn't make any sense." "Oh, it does." Arya started laughing. "You're so bad in the kitchen. Even the appliances give up." Ethan tried to stay serious, but the corners of his mouth twitched, and then he started laughing too. Theo appeared in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. "Why is there smoke?" "Because your dad decided to declare war on the microwave," Arya replied, still laughing, "and he lost." "I did not lose," Ethan protested. "It was a technical tie." Arya laughed so hard she had to lean against the counter. She grabbed a soda can nearby and opened it, trying to pull herself together, but the laughter still had her. And when she tried to take a sip, she spilled half the soda on the floor. Oh no! She looked at the brown puddles spreading across the white floor. Ethan stepped back, trying to avoid the soda, but landed right on the slipperiest part. His feet slid forward, arms flailing in the air for balance, and he fell flat on his back with a thud. Arya dropped the can and ran to help him. "Are you okay? Let me help you." She reached out to him, but as she pulled, her own feet slipped on the soda. Arya lost her balance and fell backward, landing next to Ethan with another thud. They both lay on the kitchen floor, staring at the ceiling. Theo appeared above them, looking down. "Are you guys okay?" Arya turned her head toward Ethan. He did the same. Their eyes met, and for a second they just looked at each other. Then Arya started to laugh, a quiet laugh at first, growing louder until it filled the whole kitchen. Ethan tried to hold it back, but it was impossible. He laughed too, a genuine full laugh that Arya had never heard from him before. "We're pathetic," Arya said between laughs. "Completely," Ethan agreed, running a hand over his face. Theo, not quite understanding what was going on, started laughing too, and threw himself down between them. "This is fun," the boy shouted. The three of them stayed there, lying on the sticky soda-covered floor, laughing like it was the most natural thing in the world. When they finally managed to get up, Arya grabbed a dish towel and started cleaning up the mess. Ethan helped, still smiling. "I think we'll have to order pizza," he said, tossing some paper towels into the trash. "Good idea. And this time, let me make the call. I don't trust you around appliances anymore." They ordered pepperoni pizza and grape soda. While they waited for the delivery, Arya set the table, and Theo picked out an animated movie for them to watch afterward. When the pizza arrived, the three of them sat at the table. Ethan served the slices. Arya poured the drinks, and Theo couldn't stop talking about the paper airplanes he had made. Everything was calm and cozy, until Theo, with his mouth full of pizza, asked a completely unexpected question. "Daddy, could you and Arya get married?" Arya choked on her soda. She started coughing, eyes watery. Ethan froze. The slice of pizza stuck halfway to his mouth. "What?" Arya managed to say between coughs. Theo looked at them both with pure innocence. "Married like in the movies. Then Arya could live here forever, and we'd be a real family." Ethan slowly put the pizza back on his plate, as if a sudden movement might break the moment. "Theo, that's not," he began, but didn't know how to finish. Arya wiped her mouth with a napkin, still catching her breath. "Theo, I already live here," she said, trying to keep the tone light. "We don't have to get married for that." "But it'd be cooler if you were really my mom," the boy insisted, his eyes shining. "You make funny pancakes and play with me. And you make Dad laugh." The silence at the table was deafening. Arya looked at Ethan, who was staring at his plate like the answer to all life's problems was hidden somewhere between the cheese and the tomato sauce. "Theo," Arya said gently, "your dad and I were just—" She searched for the right words. "We're friends. He's my boss. I take care of you. It's different, but you laugh together." Theo argued with the simple logic of a child. "And you both fell on the floor today. And last night you played Uno until late. That's family stuff." Ethan finally looked up and met Arya's eyes. There was something in his gaze that she couldn't quite read. Confusion, fear, hope. "Theo, finish your pizza," Ethan said, his voice a bit firmer. "Then we'll watch the movie you picked." "But Daddy Theo," Ethan repeated, this time more serious. The boy pouted but obeyed, returning to his food in silence. "But Daddy Theo," Ethan repeated. Her heart was still pounding. And not just because she'd choked. It was because of the question, and because of the way Ethan had looked at her, right after. The rest of dinner went by in uncomfortable silence. Theo tried a few times to start a conversation, but neither Arya nor Ethan seemed very responsive. When they finished, Arya quickly cleared the dishes and took them to the sink. Ethan took Theo to the living room to watch a movie. Arya stayed in the kitchen longer than she needed to, washing the dishes with automatic movements. Married? The idea was absurd, ridiculous, impossible. But why had her heart started racing like that when Theo asked? The next morning, Arya woke up with a strange feeling that something had shifted. Theo's question was still echoing in her head, and she couldn't stop thinking about Ethan's expression when the boy had said it. She went down to the kitchen earlier than usual, needing strong coffee to sort out her thoughts. She was pouring her cup when the doorbell rang. She frowned. Who could it be this early? She opened the door and saw Nora, the nanny from the house next door, a woman in her early 42s, always with her hair pulled into a tight bun and a look like she knew all the secrets of the world. "Good morning, Arya," Nora said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Good morning, Nora. Do you need something?" "Oh, no, I just came to bring this." She held out a plastic container. "We had some carrot cake left over from yesterday's party. I thought I'd share." Arya took the container, suspicious. Nora had never been the sharing type. "Thank you. That's kind of you." Nora leaned in slightly like she was about to share a secret. "So, how are things going around here? I saw Mr. Harlow arriving early yesterday. It's nice he's spending more time at home, isn't it?" Arya felt a little alarm go off in her head. "Yes, he's been trying to have dinner with Theo more often." "How sweet," Nora said with an overly cheerful smile. "And do you also eat with them?" "Sometimes," Arya replied, unsure where the conversation was going. "Huh? That's cozy." The word hung in the air uncomfortably. Arya narrowed her eyes. "Sorry, cozy." "How?" Nora shrugged, but the gesture carried a hint of mischief. "Oh, you know how people are, always talking. Young nanny, single, handsome boss, family dinners. People start to talk, you know." Arya felt her blood boil. "Who's talking, Nora?" "Oh, honey, don't take it personally." Nora let out a fake little laugh. It's just that the neighbors have been commenting. They say you two are very close. One of the staff mentioned seeing you laughing together in the kitchen the other day. And you know how people interpret things. Interpret? Arya crossed her arms. Or invent. Nora feigned innocence. I'm just repeating what I heard. I'm not the one saying you two are having an affair. Arya's jaw dropped, stunned. An affair? You've got to be kidding. But no need to get upset with me, Nora said, raising her hands defensively. I just thought you should know what people are saying. After all, reputation is everything, right? And with that, Nora turned and walked away, leaving Arya standing at the door with the cake container in her hands and fury rising in her chest. She shut the door harder than she meant to and went back to the kitchen, taking deep breaths. She set the container on the counter with so much force it nearly cracked. Gossip queen, she muttered. She has to make things up where there's nothing. But the seed of doubt had been planted. Were other people thinking the same thing? Did Ethan know about the rumors? When Ethan came down for breakfast, Arya was still upset. He noticed right away. Is something wrong? He asked, pouring himself some coffee. Arya crossed her arms. Did you know the neighbors think we're having an affair? Ethan froze with the cup in midair. Is something wrong? He asked, pouring himself some coffee. They say we're too close. Ethan calmly set his cup down on the counter. And does it bother you what they say? Of course it does, Arya exclaimed. My reputation is on the line. People are going to think I'm the kind of person who gets involved with her boss. Ethan looked at her with his usual serious expression. But you're not involved. I know that. You know that. But apparently no one else does. Arya, Ethan said firmly. Ignore it. Bored people make up stories. Don't give it any weight. Easy for you to say, Arya muttered. You're the rich boss. I'm just the nanny. Guess who's going to come out looking like the villain in this story? Ethan sighed, but didn't respond. He grabbed his briefcase and headed for the door. I'm going to work. Try not to let it get to you. Sure, it's not bothering me at all, Arya said sarcastically. But he was already gone. The day dragged on. Arya tried to distract herself by playing with Theo, but the conversation with Nora still bothered her. How could people be so petty? That evening, after dinner, Theo asked if they could play something fun. Arya suggested charades, and the boy loved the idea. I'll go first, Theo shouted, jumping with excitement. He pretended to be a lion, then an airplane, and finally a robot, which made Arya laugh because the robot was clearly an imitation of his own father. Ethan walked into the room in the middle of the game, and to Arya's surprise, he sat on the couch to watch. Dad, now it's your turn. Theo held out the paper with the word to Ethan. Theo, I don't, please. Ethan sighed, but took the paper. He read the word and frowned. How do I do this? No talking. Just act it out. Theo laughed. How do I do this? No talking. Ethan stood up and started miming. Arya's eyes widened. Marriage. Ethan froze. Theo clapped his hands. You got it. It was marriage. Arya felt her face grow warm. Ethan was still standing in the middle of the room, his hands in the air like he'd been caught doing something he shouldn't. My turn. Arya stood up quickly, trying to hide her embarrassment. She picked a paper and read, Marriage. Of course, the universe was clearly conspiring against her. She took a deep breath and began acting it out. She made the gesture of putting on a veil, then walking down an aisle, and then holding an invisible bouquet. Theo shouted the answer, but Arya kept going. She looked at Ethan and, without really thinking, made a motion placing a ring on his finger. Ethan stared at her, his eyes locked on hers for a little too long. Then, as if in a trance, he stepped forward. Arya stepped forward too. Their hearts were pounding in sync. His face was close. Too close. Dad, Arya, are you really going to kiss? Theo shouted, excited. The boy's voice broke the moment. Ethan stepped back at once like he'd been shocked. This can't happen, he said, his voice tense. Arya blinked, still trying to process what had almost happened. Then, anger took over. Fine, she said, crossing her arms, because I don't want anything to do with a suit-wearing iceberg anyway. Ethan clenched his jaw. Arya, no. Really, you're right. It would be ridiculous. She turned to Theo, forcing a smile. Theo, how about we keep playing just the two of us? Your dad has important, cold-hearted things to do. Arya, that's immature, Ethan said. Immature? Arya spun around. Immature is almost kissing me, and then acting like I've got some contagious disease. I wasn't going to kiss you. Oh, come on. You were 2 inches away. You stepped forward. So did you. Theo looked back and forth between them, like he was watching a tennis match. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. This is exactly the kind of thing that can't happen. You heard the rumors today. Imagine if what? If someone found out you almost kissed the nanny. Arya snapped, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Relax, Mr. Harlow. Your secret's safe with me. Heaven forbid a man like you stoops so low. That's not what this is about. Then what is it about? Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked at Theo, who was staring wide-eyed, then back at Arya. I have to work, and he left the room, leaving Arya standing there, shaking with anger, and something else she didn't want to admit. Theo tugged on her sleeve. Arya, why did you two fight? She took a deep breath and knelt beside him. Grown-ups can be complicated, Theo, but it's okay. Want to keep playing? But it wasn't okay, and Arya knew it. The next few days were strange. Ethan practically vanished. He left the house before Arya woke up and came back after Theo was already asleep. When he needed to talk to her, he sent short, professional text messages. No more chats in the kitchen, no more family dinners, nothing. Arya tried not to care. After all, she was just the nanny. She had no right to miss him, but she did. And that only made her more upset. On Wednesday morning, Arya was in the kitchen making coffee when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Ethan came down wearing a navy blue suit, his tie perfectly straight, hair neat. He looked even more distant than in the past few days. He walked into the kitchen without looking at her, went straight to the coffee machine, and grabbed a mug. Arya bit her lip. The silence was unbearable. She held the coffee pot and turned to pour herself a cup when her elbow hit the handle of Ethan's mug, which was sitting at the edge of the counter. The mug tipped. Hot coffee spilled directly onto his dress shoe. Ethan jumped back, but it was too late. The brown liquid ran down the black leather. Seriously? He looked at Arya in disbelief. It was an accident, Arya said, but it didn't come out very convincingly. An accident? Ethan grabbed a towel and started drying his shoe. You bumped it on purpose. I did not. Arya crossed her arms. It's not my fault. You leave things on the edge of the counter. The cup wasn't near the edge. Yes, it was about to fall. Arya, I know the difference between an accident and acting out. Acting out? Arya felt her anger rising. I'm not 5 years old, Ethan. Then stop acting like it. Me? You're the one who's been avoiding me for the past 3 days like I'm a ghost. Ethan threw the dish towel on the counter. I've been busy. I have a company to run. Ethan threw the dish towel on the counter. Of course you do. I've been busy. But before you used to make it home in time to have dinner with your son. Arya rolled her eyes. Now, not even that. It is when I'm the one who has to comfort Theo every night when he asks why his dad isn't home. Ethan opened his mouth to reply, but closed it again. He grabbed his briefcase and headed toward the door. I have to go, he said, his voice cold. Of course you do, Arya muttered loud enough for him to hear. Run away. It's what you do best. Ethan stopped at the door. He turned slowly. What did you say? Arya stared at him, her eyes shining with frustration. You heard me. Every time things get hard, you run. You throw yourself into work, hide behind the company, pretend nothing happened. But you know what? That won't make your problems disappear. The silence that followed was heavy. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, his jaw tight, his dark eyes impossible to read. You don't know anything about me, he finally said, and walked out. Arya was left alone in the kitchen, her heart racing, her hands shaking. Had she gone too far? Probably, but so had he, ignoring her like that, avoiding his own home because of one stupid, almost kiss. The rest of the day dragged on. Arya took Theo to the park, made lunch, helped with his homework, but her mind was somewhere else. In the afternoon, while Theo was drawing in the living room, Arya heard the front door open. Ethan had come home early. That was unusual. He walked into the room and looked at his son. Theo dropped his crayons and ran to him. Daddy, you're home early. Ethan picked the boy up, but Arya noticed he looked tired. Exhausted. Really, I am. I thought I'd spend some time with you. Can we play video games? Of course. Theo ran off to get controllers and Ethan finally looked at Arya. She quickly looked away and went upstairs to give them space. Hours later, with the sun already setting, Arya came downstairs to start dinner. She stopped in the hallway when she heard a teary voice coming from the living room. It was Theo. She walked over quietly and saw the boy sitting on the couch, tears running down his cheeks. Ethan wasn't there. Arya walked into the room and knelt in front of him. Theo, what happened? Why are you crying? The boy wiped his face with his shirt sleeve. Daddy went to work again. He said he'd stay, but he had to leave. Arya felt a sting in her chest. She hugged Theo tightly. Sometimes grown-ups have to work even when they don't want to. But he always leaves. Theo sniffled. Doesn't he like being with me? Of course he does. Arya held the boy's face in her hands. Your dad loves you so much. Theo, you're the most important thing in the world to him. Then why does he leave all the time? Arya took a deep breath, choosing her words carefully. Sometimes adults are scared of feelings, of getting too close, because when you truly love someone, it hurts a lot if you lose them. And your dad already lost someone very important. So now he's afraid. My mom, Arya nodded. And your dad already lost someone very important. So now he's afraid. And your dad already lost someone very important. So now he's afraid. Theo thought for a moment. And what about you, Arya? Are you scared too? The question caught Arya off guard. She gave a sad smile. Sometimes, but I'm learning that being scared shouldn't stop us from loving people because love is the most important thing there is. Do you love my dad? Arya froze. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. That's when she heard a voice behind her. You're right. I am. Arya quickly turned around. Ethan was standing at the doorway. Still in his suit, grew up with an expression so vulnerable she almost didn't recognize him. I'm scared, he repeated, stepping closer. I'm scared of getting too close, of caring too much, of losing again. Theo wiped his tears and looked at his father. Ethan knelt in front of his son and Arya. I'm sorry, Theo, for staying away, for not being here when you needed me. The boy threw himself into his father's arms and Ethan hugged him tightly. Arya stood up to give them space, but Ethan reached out and grabbed her wrist. Don't go, he said softly. Please. Arya stood still, her heart racing. Ethan looked at her with such intensity it took her breath away. We need to talk, he said. A real talk. No running, no interruptions. Arya swallowed hard. When? Tonight after Theo goes to bed. She hesitated. Part of her wanted to say no to protect her heart. Arya swallowed hard. Arya swallowed hard. After Theo finally fell asleep, Arya came downstairs with her heart beating faster than she'd like to admit. She found Ethan in the living room, sitting on the couch, hands clasped together, elbows resting on his knees. He was staring at the floor like he was trying to gather courage. Arya stopped at the doorway, arms crossed in a defensive posture. So, she said, breaking the silence, is this the part where you give me a corporate speech about professional boundaries? Ethan lifted his head and almost smiled. No, I just want to stop running. Arya sat down in the armchair across from him, keeping a safe distance. She waited. Ethan took a deep breath before starting. I'm not good at this, talking about feelings, about what's going on in here. He touched his chest. But I promised I'd try. He paused, searching for the right words. Being a single dad is hard, harder than I thought. Some days I look at Theo and wonder if I'm doing anything right, if I'm the father he deserves, or if I'm just failing. Arya opened her mouth to speak, but Ethan raised his hand. Let me finish, please. She nodded. When my wife died, I had no idea how to handle it. She was the one who held everything together. I was the work guy, the meetings guy, the contracts guy. She was the heart of the home. And when she was gone, I panicked. Suddenly, I had a 2-year-old and no idea how to be both mom and dad. His voice trembled slightly, but he kept going. Her parents started questioning everything, said I wasn't around enough, that Theo needed more than I could give. And the hardest part was they were right. I wasn't there. I buried myself in work because that was the only thing I knew how to do, the only place I didn't feel completely lost. Arya felt a tightness in her chest. She had never seen Ethan this vulnerable. I built walls, Ethan admitted. Big, thick ones. Because if I didn't let anyone in, I wouldn't have to feel the pain of losing someone again. And it worked. For 3 years, it worked until you showed up. Arya felt her face warm. You came into my house with your flamingo slippers, your bad jokes, your dinosaur-shaped pancakes. And suddenly, Theo was smiling again, laughing, being a kid. And I realized the house wasn't just a house anymore. It was a home. Ethan finally looked her in the eye. And that scared me because the more I saw you with him, the more I started seeing you differently. Not as the nanny, as something more, and I can't. Because if I let that happen, and it goes wrong, it's not just me who gets hurt. Theo does, too. Arya stayed quiet for a moment, letting it all sink in. Then, to Ethan's surprise, she let out a small laugh. Wow, you're human, she said with a crooked smile. Here, I was thinking you really were a robot programmed to sign contracts and wear perfect suits. Ethan shook his head. almost laughing. You never take anything seriously, do you? That's not it. Arya sighed, the smile fading. Ethan shook his head, almost laughing. She looked down at her hands. I get you more than you think. Ethan waited, sensing it was her turn now. Arya took a deep breath. My dad always said I'd never be good enough for anything. That I was too loud, too clumsy, too much of a dreamer. He wanted me to be a lawyer or a doctor or anything that would impress his friends. But I just wanted to be happy, and that was never enough for him. Her voice grew softer. My mom was different. She understood me, supported me, told me being different was a good thing. But she died when I was 18. Her voice grew softer. So did the rest of my family. Without her, there was nothing keeping us together anymore. Arya quickly wiped her eyes. So, I came to New York. I started working as a nanny because taking care of kids makes me feel like I'm doing something that matters, something meaningful, even if my dad never thought it was anything to be proud of. She looked at Ethan, and then I met you two, you and Theo. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something, part of a family, even if it wasn't really mine. The silence that followed was full of emotion. Ethan leaned forward, and without realizing it, took Arya's hand. She looked at their hands, surprised. He didn't seem to notice what he'd done. He was too focused on her eyes. You're good enough, Arya, he said, his voice firm. More than good enough. You're amazing. And anyone who doesn't see that is blind. Arya felt her heart race. Ethan's hand was warm, steady, holding hers like it was the most natural thing in the world, and he wasn't letting go. She looked at him. Ethan looked back. The space between them suddenly felt smaller. Or maybe it had always been small, and they were just now noticing. Ethan leaned in slightly. Arya did too. The air was heavy with anticipation. Arya. Theo's voice echoed from upstairs. Arya, where are you? They pulled apart instantly as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. Ethan let go of her hand, and Arya felt the cold right away. Quick footsteps came down the stairs. Theo appeared in the room holding his blue dinosaur. Arya, I can't sleep. Rex is scared of the dark. Arya smiled, trying to steady her breathing. Is Rex scared? Or are you? Theo frowned. Okay, it's me. But will you come upstairs with me? Of course. Arya stood. But Theo looked at her hands and his father's. Is Rex scared? Or are you? Theo frowned. Arya blushed. No, I was just adjusting his watch. The watch is on his wrist, not in his hand. Theo pointed out with that perfect child logic. Ethan cleared his throat. Theo, shouldn't you be in bed? Are you two getting married? Theo ignored his father's question. Because Lily from school says grown-ups only hold hands when they're going to get married. Theo, that's not how it works. Arya tried to explain, but you were really close. Just like in the movies right before the kiss. Ethan covered his face with his hand. Clearly embarrassed. Theo, upstairs now. But I just want to know if upstairs, Ethan repeated, though there was a slight smile on his face. Theo pouted, but obeyed. Arya followed him, still feeling the warmth of Ethan's hand in hers. In the bedroom, she helped Theo get settled, tucked him in, and sat beside him. Arya, Theo whispered, do you like my dad? Arya hesitated. Your dad is a good man. That's not what I asked. The kid was too smart for his own good. Sleep. Theo. Arya kissed his forehead. We'll talk tomorrow. You always say that and I always stall. I know. She smiled. But some things are just too complicated to explain. Theo closed his eyes but mumbled before falling asleep. I think you and Dad should be together. You're both happy when you're near each other. Arya stayed a few more minutes waiting for him to fall completely asleep. When she finally came downstairs, Ethan was still in the living room waiting. Is he asleep? He asked. He is. And he questioned me about you on the way up. Ethan smiled. He's persistent. Yeah. Takes after his dad. They stood there for a moment, unsure of what to say. So much had happened that night. So much had been revealed. The next morning, after everyone had finished breakfast, the doorbell rang. Ethan and Arya looked toward the door. Who would be ringing at this hour? Ethan walked over and opened it. A woman in a business suit stood outside holding a folder with a professional look on her face. Mr. Harlow? She asked. I'm Carla Ruiz, county social worker. I'm here for a follow-up visit regarding the shared custody case for minor Theodore Harlow. Ethan froze. Arya felt her stomach twist. The social worker gave a polite smile. I know it's early, but would it be all right to come in? This won't take long. Ethan opened the door fully, trying to stay composed. Of course. Come in, he said, his voice tight. Carla Ruiz stepped into the house with measured steps, her eyes scanning the space with professional attention. Arya, who had been in the living room, quickly stood, smoothing her blouse out of pure nerves. "Good morning," the social worker greeted. "You must be the nanny, correct?" Arya Bennett. She held out her hand. "Nice to meet you." Carla shook her hand politely and took a notepad from her folder. "As I told Mr. Harlow, this is just a routine check. Nothing to worry about. We just want to make sure Theodore is in a healthy environment." And a loud shriek cut her off. Everyone turned toward the stairs. Theo came running down completely naked, wearing only underwear on his head like a hat. "I'm Super Theo," the boy shouted, arms out like he was flying. "And I'm here to save the world from clothes." Arya's eyes widened. Ethan froze. Carla Ruiz blinked several times, as if trying to process what she was seeing. "Theo," Ethan said, his voice slightly louder than usual, "go get dressed right now. And I'm here to save the world from clothes." "Who are you?" Carla opened her mouth, but Arya was quicker. She ran over to Theo, pulled off her hoodie, leaving just her undershirt, and wrapped the boy in it. "Come on, champ. Time to get dressed," she said, lifting him up in her arms. Super Theo needs a proper uniform. But Arya, no buts. She was already climbing the stairs with him. "Go get dressed right now. Who are you?" Carla opened her mouth, but Arya was quicker. When he looked at Carla, her expression was hard to read. "Go get dressed right now. He's going through a creative phase, and take off those underpants from your head before they turn into a permanent hat. And I'm here to save the world from clothes." Arya came back a few minutes later with Theo now dressed in a dinosaur t-shirt and shorts. But Arya, no buts. "All set," Arya announced. Arya came back a few minutes later with Theo now dressed in a dinosaur t-shirt and shorts. Then she looked down and noticed it. "Children are unpredictable," Carla replied, jotting something down in her notepad. "Bright, red, and impossible to miss." "Oh, perfect," she muttered to herself. He still looked a bit disappointed that he'd lost his chance to be naked Super Theo. Carla glanced at the stain, but didn't say a word. She just made another note. Ethan noticed Arya's discomfort and quickly tried to shift the focus. "Shall we sit down?" he offered, gesturing toward the couch. Just what I needed to look even more professional. Carla sat gracefully, crossing her legs. Arya sat next to Theo, who immediately climbed into her lap. Ethan remained standing, posture stiff like he was in a business meeting. "So, Mr. Harlow," Carla began, "how have things been going? Is Theo settled into the routine?" "Yes, very well," Ethan replied, voice formal. "He goes to school every day, does his activities, has a regular schedule." Carla looked at Theo. "And you, Theo? Do you like living here with your dad?" Theo nodded, hugging his dinosaur to his chest. "Of course. Arya makes funny pancakes. And Daddy plays video games with me now." Carla smiled and wrote something else down. "And does Arya live here with you?" "No," Ethan answered quickly. "She has a room upstairs, but it's just to make work easier." "Yes, I see." Carla looked at Arya. "And how is it working here, Miss Bennett?" Arya felt everyone's eyes on her. "She looks after Theo while I'm at the office. It's good. Theo is a wonderful child. And Mr. Harlow is a devoted father." "Devoted?" Carla repeated. "Can you elaborate?" Arya glanced at Ethan, who looked tense. "He works a lot, that's true, but whenever he can, he's here." She took a deep breath and tried to sound confident. "He's learning how to balance everything." Carla took more notes. The silence in the room felt heavy. "He's learning how to balance everything. Harlow is a devoted father. I'm here because the Lang family requested a custody reassessment. He eats dinner with Theo, plays with him, stays involved in his life." Ethan clenched his jaw. "With all due respect, they're wrong." "I understand your position," Carla continued, "but I need to make an objective evaluation. That's why I'm here to see how Theodore is actually living." She looked around. The house was fairly tidy. There were toys scattered around, but it wasn't messy. It looked lived in, like a real home. "They claim you don't have enough time to properly care for Theodore, and that he would be better off in their care. Alone?" Ethan hesitated, but nodded. Arya set Theo down and whispered in his ear, "Just tell the truth, okay?" Theo nodded and followed Carla into the kitchen. Once they were alone, Arya turned to Ethan. "You didn't tell me you were having custody issues." Ethan sighed and sat down on the couch. "I didn't want to worry you, and I didn't think it was that serious. But my wife's mother, Vivian, has always believed I wasn't enough as a father. She wants Theo. She thinks she can give him a better life." Arya felt a tightness in her chest. "Can she?" "What?" Ethan looked at her, surprised. "Can she give him a better life?" Ethan was quiet for a moment. Financially, yes. Emotionally, maybe she has time, patience, everything. I don't. Ethan, that's not true. Yes, it is. You know it. I'm a mess as a father. I blow up microwaves, miss school meetings, spend more time at the office than at home. Arya sat beside him. But you're trying, and that matters. Just tell the truth, okay? Theo nodded and followed Carla into the kitchen. Theo knows you love him. Does that matter to a judge? Before Arya could answer, Carla and Theo came back. The boy ran to his dad and climbed into his lap. Carla looked at them both, then at Arya, and finally made one last note. It seems your son is doing well, Mr. Harlow, she said, closing her notepad and surrounded by a lot of love. Ethan let out a relieved breath. Thank you. Carla stood up. I'll write my report and send it to the court. But I can say the home is in order. Theo is happy and healthy, and it's clear there are people here who care about him. She looked at Arya, especially you, Miss Bennett. I'll write my report and send it to the court. But I can say the home is in order. Arya felt her face grow warm. Carla walked to the door, but before leaving, she turned back. Carla stood up. Harlow, if you need additional references for the case, people who can speak about the family environment, it would be wise to prepare that. And with that, she left. Ethan stood still, processing everything. After a few seconds, he looked at Arya, and with that, she left. She waited. Would you be willing to be a formal reference in the case? To testify about what things are like here, about how Theo's doing? Arya blinked, surprised. You want me to go to court? Yes, if it comes to that, you spend more time with him than anyone else. You see everything. The judge needs to hear that. Arya looked at Theo, who was playing on the floor with his dinosaur. Then she looked back at Ethan. Of course, she said, though her voice came out hesitant. Are you sure? I'm sure. I'll help. But even as she said it, her eyes showed doubt because testifying meant getting even more involved. It meant making a commitment. And part of her was afraid of what that might mean for her own heart. 3 days after the social worker's visit, life in the house seemed to have gone back to normal or almost. Arya noticed Ethan was more tense, checking his phone constantly, like he was expecting bad news at any moment. That Saturday morning, Arya was in the kitchen with Ethan and Theo, the three of them making pancakes, but not just any pancakes. These were artistic pancakes. Mine's going to be a unicorn, Theo announced, pouring the batter into the pan in a completely random shape. That looks more like a slug with a horn, Arya joked, laughing. And yours is better? Theo pointed at Arya's pancake, which was supposed to be a cat, but looked more like a deformed alien. Ethan was trying to make a perfect circle, but the batter kept running off to the sides, forming something that looked like an amoeba. Mr. Harlow, your cooking skills are as impressive as ever, Arya teased. At least mine won't give anyone nightmares, he replied, glancing at Arya's alien cat. The three of them were laughing when the doorbell rang. Ethan frowned and went to answer it. When he opened the door, he froze. Vivian. Arya, who was flipping a pancake, paused mid-motion. Vivian, his mother-in-law, a well-dressed woman in her 60 seconds, entered the house. Perfectly styled gray hair, expensive but modest clothing, upright posture. She looked around with sharp eyes. Ethan. She greeted him in a formal tone. I hope I'm not intruding. No, of course not, Ethan replied, clearly lying. What brings you here? I spoke to the social worker, Vivian said, walking toward the kitchen. She mentioned that Theo is doing well. I wanted to see for myself. As she entered the kitchen, she stopped. Theo had flour on his face. Arya was holding a spatula dripping batter, and Ethan had a chocolate syrup stain on his shirt. Grandma. Theo ran over and hugged her legs. Vivian smiled, but it was a tight smile. She patted her grandson's head. Hello, dear. What are you making? Unicorn pancakes. Theo showed her his creation in the skillet. Vivian looked at Arya, examining her from head to toe. You must be the nanny. Arya Bennett, she said, reaching out her hand, trying to wipe off some flour first. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Lang. Vivian shook her hand briefly without much enthusiasm. I've heard a lot about you from the social worker. Her tone was neutral, but Arya felt there was something behind the words. Ethan cleared his throat. Vivian, if I had known you were coming, I would have prepared the house? Vivian interrupted. I prefer it this way to see how things really are. She looked around at the messy kitchen, the oddly shaped pancakes, and the three of them covered in flour and syrup. Interesting. was all she said. "Grandma, are you staying?" Theo asked hopefully. Vivian looked at her grandson, and her expression softened. "If your father doesn't mind, I'd like to spend a few days here to spend time together." Ethan had no way to say no. "Of course, make yourself at home." And that's how the strangest days Arya had ever experienced in that house began. Vivian settled into the guest room, and from the very first day she watched everything. Arya felt her eyes on her all the time, when she played with Theo, when she cooked meals, when she helped with homework on the second day. Arya was giving Theo a bath when she dropped the shampoo bottle. It rolled across the bathroom floor and hit the door. Vivian appeared immediately. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, just the shampoo acting rebellious," Arya said, picking the bottle up from the floor. Vivian watched as Arya dried. Theo put his pajamas on and carefully combed his hair. "You do this every day?" "Yes, it's part of the routine." Vivian nodded but didn't say anything else. On the third day, Arya was making lunch when she slightly burned the rice. Vivian was in the kitchen and commented, "You should lower the heat earlier." "I know," Arya replied, trying not to sound defensive. Vivian watched as Arya dried. Theo put his pajamas on and carefully combed his hair. "A second is all it takes for things to go wrong," Vivian said. But her tone wasn't cruel, it was just factual. Arya began to feel pressured, as if she were constantly being tested. But then on the fourth day, something changed. Theo was playing in the living room when he tripped and fell, scraping his knee. He started crying loudly. Arya ran to him, picked him up, and carried him to the kitchen. "Let me see, champ." She examined his knee. "Ah, just a little scratch. You're strong. It will heal soon." She grabbed a Band-Aid from the cabinet. But it wasn't just any Band-Aid. It had superhero designs. "Look at this. Spider-Man is going to protect your knee now," she said carefully. Putting it on, Theo stopped crying and looked at the Band-Aid. "Really? Really? And do you know what else helps?" Arya put on a serious face. "Medicinal ice cream." "Medicinal ice cream?" Theo repeated, his eyes lighting up. "Yes, it's scientifically proven that ice cream cures scraped knees." Arya opened the freezer and took out a cone. Vivian, who was watching from the doorway, shook her head, but there was a small smile at the corner of her mouth. In the following days, Vivian kept watching, but Arya noticed that the critical look was changing, becoming softer, more curious. One night, Arya was telling Theo a bedtime story. When Vivian appeared at the bedroom door, she stayed there listening to Arya do different voices for each character, making Theo laugh. When the boy finally fell asleep, Vivian followed Arya into the hallway. "You're good with him?" she said. And Arya realized it wasn't a criticism. It was acknowledgement. "Thank you. He's an amazing boy." Vivian looked at Theo's bedroom door. This house used to be so empty, cold, like a museum, but now there's life here. Arya didn't know what to say. Vivian looked at her. "You brought this. The life, the warmth. But now there's life here." Arya stood in the hallway, her heart tight. Was Vivian starting to like her? Or was it just a casual remark? The next day, Arya was passing by Ethan's office when she heard his voice on the phone. "Yes, I need someone to start on Monday. A housekeeper to prepare breakfast and organize the house. Can you send the resume?" Arya stopped. Her stomach turned. A housekeeper to make breakfast. But she was the one who made breakfast every day. She was the one who made the pancakes, the eggs, the coffee. She was the one who set the table, and now he was going to hire someone to do her job. Arya walked into the office without knocking. Ethan quickly hung up the phone. "Arya, housekeeper." She interrupted him, her voice trembling. "You're going to hire a housekeeper?" Ethan sighed. "It's necessary. With Vivian here, and with the custody process, I need to show that the house is in order, that it has a professional structure. Professional structure." Arya felt her anger rising. "I'm not enough structure. This isn't about you." "Of course it is." Arya crossed her arms. "You're replacing me, putting every piece in the right place. The housekeeper takes care of the house and the breakfast, and I always take care of Theo and the breakfast he loves. Now I won't even make his breakfast. I'll just be another disposable employee in a few days." "Arya, you're overreacting." "I'm not. You're trying to formalize everything, put me in a box. But I'm not a decorative piece, nor a stepping stone for a lonely millionaire." Ethan stood up from his chair. "You know that's not it." "Then what is it?" They stood face to face, their breathing fast, the tension filling all the space between them, and then Ethan kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't planned. When they finally pulled apart, both were out of breath. It wasn't gentle. Arya was surprised for a second, but then she kissed him back, her hands clutching his shoulders. Frustration turned into something else. Arya, Ethan began, but she kissed him again. And this time, they didn't stop. That night, they crossed a line they shouldn't have crossed. The next morning, Arya woke up in Ethan's room. The daylight streamed through the window, and the reality of what had happened hit her like a bucket of cold water. Ethan was sitting on the edge of the bed, already dressed, his head in his hands. "Ethan," Arya called, pulling the sheet around her. He didn't turn. This was a mistake. The words hit her like a punch. "What?" Ethan finally looked at her, but there was distance in his eyes. "Vivian is here. The custody case is moving forward. If she finds out I'm having a romance with the nanny, I'll lose Theo." Arya felt the tears burning. "So that's all this was? A mistake. Arya, please try to understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly." She stood up, grabbing her clothes. "You want me to forget everything and just go back to being the professional nanny?" "Yes," Ethan said, and that word hurt more than Arya expected. She walked out of the room, murmuring to herself, "If only he had said we should wait until the custody was official, I would have understood, but calling it a mistake, that's too much." The next day, Arya couldn't take it anymore. She went upstairs to her room and started packing. That's when Theo came in. "Arya, what are you doing?" She stopped, hands trembling. "Theo." The boy saw the open suitcase, and his eyes filled with tears. "You're leaving?" His voice cracked. "Theo, don't go." "Arya." He ran to her and hugged her, crying, "Please, I love you. I want you to be my new mommy." Arya felt her heart break into 1,000 pieces. She got down on her knees and hugged him. "Theo, I love you, too. I want you to be my new mommy." "But why?" he sobbed, because Arya didn't have an answer. "I have to go, but I'll visit you all the time." "I promise." "But why?" he sobbed. "I have to go, but I'll visit you all the time." Arya quickly wiped away her tears and let go of Theo. "It's going to be okay, champ," she said, trying to smile. "You're strong and your dad loves you very much." "But I want you here," Theo insisted, clinging to her shirt. Arya looked at the boy and felt her chest tighten even more. How do you explain to a 5-year-old that the adult world is far too complicated, that sometimes love isn't enough? That's when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She turned and saw Vivian standing in the doorway watching the scene with a serious expression. "Theo, sweetheart," Vivian said softly, "can you go downstairs and get me some juice?" Theo hesitated, looking from Arya to his grandmother. "But I'll talk to Arya." "I promise," Vivian assured him. Reluctantly, Theo left the room, still sniffling. Once they were alone, Vivian stepped in and closed the door behind her. "So, you're really leaving?" It wasn't a question. Arya went back to packing, avoiding the woman's eyes. "Yes, I think it's for the best." "Best for who?" Arya stopped, her hands resting on a folded shirt. "For everyone." Vivian crossed her arms. "Theo's crying. For everyone." "Best for who?" Arya stopped, her hands resting on a folded shirt. "And I'm sure Ethan, wherever he is, isn't doing well either." "Ethan's fine," Arya replied, her voice sharper than she meant. "He made it very clear I'm just the nanny, nothing more." Vivian was quiet for a moment, watching Arya. "Do you love him?" The question caught Arya off guard. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. "It's a simple question," Vivian pressed. "It's not for lack of love," Arya finally said, closing the suitcase. "It's for personal reasons, complicated ones, and I'd rather not get into them." She picked up the suitcase and walked toward the door, but Vivian didn't move. "You changed this house. When I arrived, I expected to find a cold museum like it always was, but instead, I found life, laughter, love, and all of that is because of you." Arya felt the tears return. "Vivian, please don't make this harder. Theo needs you," Vivian continued, "and whether you admit it or not, Ethan needs you too." Arya shook her head and walked past her, heading down the stairs with the heavy suitcase. Theo was in the front hall, the juice forgotten in his hand, his eyes red. Arya shook her head and walked past her, heading down the stairs with the heavy suitcase. Arya shook her head and walked past her, heading down the stairs with the heavy suitcase. Vivian continued, "And whether you admit it or not, Ethan needs you too." That's when she heard Vivian picking up the phone. The woman dialed a number with quick, firm fingers, but Arya didn't stop. She stepped out the door, dragging the suitcase down the steps. "Ethan." Vivian's voice echoed through the hall. "You need to come home right now." "No. Theo's fine," she continued, "but Aria's leaving." She stepped out the door, dragging the suitcase down the steps. "You need to come home right now. The woman you love, the woman who changed your home, the woman who gives love to your son, the woman you love." There was a pause. "I don't care if you have a meeting. Cancel it," Vivian said firmly, "because if you're not here in the next 10 minutes, you'll lose her." There was a pause. She hung up the phone and looked toward the door, but Aria was already gone. Aria walked down the street without looking back, tears streaming down her face. She had no car, nowhere to go right away, so she did the only thing she could: walked to the nearest bus stop and sat on the bench. The suitcase sat beside her. Aria hugged her knees and cried. She cried for Theo. She cried for Ethan. She cried for herself, and for the foolishness of falling in love with someone who couldn't love her back. She didn't know how much time had passed when she heard footsteps running. She looked up and saw Ethan. He had no jacket on, his tie was crooked, and his hair was a mess, like he had run the whole way. "Aria," he panted, trying to catch his breath. She quickly wiped her face and looked away. Ethan knelt down in front of her, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Ethan, don't do this," Aria pleaded, her voice breaking. "Please, I'm sorry," he said, and there was real pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry for being a coward, for being afraid, for hurting you. You made it very clear what I am to you," Aria replied. "The nanny, nothing more. I was wrong." Ethan held her hands. "I was so afraid of losing Theo, of losing the case, that I forgot what really matters." Aria tried to pull her hands away, but he didn't let go. "What matters is that you make me want to be better," Ethan went on. "You reminded me how to laugh, how to be present, how to have a real family, not just a house full of expensive furniture. But your mother-in-law Vivian called me." Ethan interrupted. "And do you know what she said?" "That I'm an idiot, and she's right." Aria let out a weak laugh, still crying. "At least we agree on that." Ethan smiled gently. "Aria, I don't want you to be my son's nanny," he said, and Aria felt her heart tighten again. "I want you to be part of our family for real, not as an employee. As the woman I love." Aria blinked, stunned. "You what?" "I love you," Ethan repeated more firmly this time. "I love you, and I was a fool for not saying it sooner, for letting fear deceive for me." Aria looked at him. This man who had been so cold in the beginning, and who now was kneeling at a bus stop, declaring his love for her. "Ethan." She started. But the words failed. "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "Just don't go. Stay. Give me a chance to prove I can be the man you deserve." Aria took a deep breath. Part of her wanted to believe, wanted it so badly, but the other part, the part that had been hurt, was still scared. "How do I know you won't change your mind again?" she asked softly. "How do I know that tomorrow you won't wake up full of regret and ask me to leave?" Ethan held her face in both hands. "Because I spent the whole morning full of regret, not for being with you, but for being a coward afterward. And I don't want another day of my life without you in it." New tears rolled down Aria's face. But this time they weren't just from sadness. "I love you too," she finally admitted, "but I'm scared. I'm scared of getting hurt again. I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving you can trust me." Aria looked into his eyes. There was sincerity there and love, but also vulnerability, something Ethan rarely showed. "Then prove it," she said. Ethan blinked. "What? Prove it," Aria repeated more firmly this time. "Prove it's not just fear of losing me." "Then prove it," she said. "Then prove it," she said. Ethan nodded slowly, understanding. "All right," he said, standing up and reaching out his hand. "Come with me." Aria hesitated for a second. Then she took his hand. He helped her up and grabbed her suitcase. "Where are we going?" Aria asked. Ethan smiled, and there was something different in that smile. Something light. "Home. And then wherever you want, because if you're going to be part of my life, I need to show you who I really am. Not the CEO, not the lonely father, just me." Aria felt her heart race again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was hope. The two of them walked back to the house, hand in hand. When they arrived, Theo was standing at the door with Vivian. The boy ran and threw himself into Aria's arms. "You're back," he shouted. "Happy." "I'm back," Aria confirmed, hugging him tight. "And I'm not going anywhere." Vivian watched the scene, and for the first time since she had arrived, gave a genuine smile. "Welcome back, Aria," she said. "Looks like my son-in-law finally woke up." Ethan looked at his mother-in-law, surprised. You approve?" "Approve?" Vivian raised an eyebrow. "If you had let her go." I would have taken you off Theo's custody just for being stupid." Arya laughed, still holding Theo. Ethan wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. "So," he whispered in her ear, "where do I start proving it?" Arya looked at him, her eyes still wet, but shining. "Start from the beginning. Show me who Ethan Harlow is when he's not hiding behind suits and contracts." He nodded. "Deal." And for the first time in a long while, Arya felt that maybe, just maybe, things could actually work out. 3 days later, Ethan woke Arya up early on a Saturday. She was still in her pajamas when he appeared at her bedroom door. "Put on something comfortable," he said with a mysterious smile. "We're going out." Arya rubbed her eyes, confused. "Out? Where? What time is it?" 7 inches the morning. "And it's a surprise." 7 a.m. on a Saturday should be illegal, Arya muttered, but got up anyway. When she came downstairs, she found Theo already dressed and full of energy, bouncing on one foot and then the other. "Arya, we're going on a picnic." "A picnic?" She looked at Ethan, who was holding a basket. "You know how to do a picnic?" "No, that's why I bought everything ready-made," he admitted without shame. "Learning from my mistakes." Arya laughed and grabbed her jacket. They got in the car and Ethan drove out of the city. Arya watched the scenery change. Tall buildings giving way to trees and smaller houses. "Where exactly are we going?" she asked. "To the place where I grew up," Ethan replied, and there was something different in his voice. Something lighter. After nearly an hour, they arrived at a small, simple park. There were some old trees, wooden benches, and a worn-out playground. Nothing fancy, nothing impressive, but it felt cozy. Ethan parked and looked around with a nostalgic smile. "I spent every summer of my childhood here," he said, getting out of the car. Theo ran to the playground, and Arya walked alongside Ethan. "I didn't picture you as a public park kid," she said. "I wasn't always a suit-wearing CEO," Ethan smiled. "Believe it or not, I was once a kid who climbed trees and came home covered in scrapes." They found a nice spot under a big tree and spread out the blanket on the ground. Ethan opened the basket and pulled out sandwiches, fruit, juice, and even some cookies. "Impressive," Arya said. "Not a single microwave exploded in the making of this picnic." "That's because I didn't make anything," Ethan replied, laughing. "I just bought it all." As they ate, Ethan pulled out his phone and started showing Arya old photos, one of him at about 8 years old, smiling with a missing front tooth. "Look at this." Arya laughed. "You were adorable." "What happened? I got serious." Ethan made a face. "And I lost that tooth in a fight over a swing." "You fought over a swing?" "It was the best swing in the park. Totally worth it." Arya laughed so hard she almost choked on her juice. It was the first time she had ever seen Ethan so relaxed, so human. He showed her more photos. His parents who had already passed away. The simple house where he grew up. His childhood friends. "Everything changed when I went to college," Ethan said, putting his phone away. "I started working hard, climbing the ladder, and somewhere along the way, I forgot about this part of me. The part that just wanted to be happy." Arya held his hand. "You can have both. You know, success and happiness." I know that now." "Hey, looked. You reminded me." Theo came running back, sweaty and smiling. "Dad, Arya, let's play something." "What do you want to play?" Ethan asked. "Uno." Arya looked at Ethan in surprise. "You brought Uno to a picnic." "Of course." He pulled the deck from his backpack. "It's the official Harlow family game now." They played right there, sitting on the blanket. But Theo started making up silly rules. If someone plays a red 7, they have to make a funny face. The boy declared. "That's not a real rule," Arya protested. "It is now," Theo insisted. Ethan played a red 7 and made the silliest face he could, crossing his eyes and puffing out his cheeks. Arya and Theo burst into laughter. "My turn." Arya played a blue +2, and the rule is whoever gets a +2 has to sing a song. Ethan drew 2 cards and began singing a birthday song completely off-key. "That makes no sense." Arya laughed so hard her eyes watered. "You didn't say which song." They kept playing with even more ridiculous rules. By the time the game ended, Theo was exhausted and laid down on the blanket, falling asleep almost instantly. Arya covered the boy with her jacket and looked at Ethan. "Thank you for today," she said softly, "for showing me this side of you." Ethan stayed quiet for a moment, just looking at her. Ethan drew 2 cards and began singing a birthday song completely off-key. Her eyes widened. Then suddenly, he knelt down in front of Arya. He raised his hands. "Ethan, what are you?" "Relax. Not yet." Arya let out the breath she'd been holding. Then what is it? Ethan took her hands in his. It's not what you're thinking. You turned my house into a home. Arya Bennett, you walked into my life wearing flamingo slippers and your wild, wonderful way of being, and you taught me it's okay not to be perfect. Arya felt her eyes fill with tears. I'm not asking you to marry me right now, Ethan continued, because I want to do it the right way at the right time. But I do want to ask you something. What is it? Ethan smiled. Can I be your partner in this crazy life? Arya blinked, surprised. You made my son smile again. Not a nervous laugh. It was genuine, happy, full of love. And then she started laughing. You got down on one knee to ask if you can be my partner. Seriously, she said, between laughs. It matters to me. Arya wiped her tears from laughing and held his face in both hands. Yes, Ethan said, smiling too. What's that? That you will never, ever, under any circumstances, try to cook again. Only if you promise me one thing. I promise. I solemnly swear I'll never go near an oven or microwave without supervision. Ethan laughed out loud. Then, yes, Arya said, pulling him closer. They kissed there under the tree with Theo sleeping beside them and the afternoon sun warming everything around them. When they pulled apart, Ethan rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Arya Bennett. I love you too, Ethan Harlow, even if you're terrible in the kitchen. He laughed and pulled her into a tight hug. And in that moment, in the simple park where Ethan had grown up, far from suits and meetings, he finally felt whole. 1 year later, Arya woke up on her birthday, expecting another ordinary day. She went downstairs in her pajamas, yawning. With Enrico, the little succulent Ethan had given her a year ago, now grown and thriving in a bigger pot by the kitchen window, the house was oddly quiet. Ethan had left early for a meeting, or at least that's what he said. Theo was at school. Arya sighed. At least she wouldn't be alone tonight. She made coffee and sat at the table, thinking back to last year's birthday. The lonely little cupcake, the crooked candle, Ethan showing up unexpectedly. How much had changed since then? She was lost in thought when she heard a noise from the living room. She frowned and went to check it out. As she stepped into the room, the lights came on all at once. Surprise! Arya jumped, putting a hand over her chest. Ethan and Theo were standing there covered in flour with a lopsided cake on the table and balloons hanging haphazardly around the room. You, Arya started but couldn't finish the sentence. We made a cake, Theo shouted, excited. Well, we tried. Arya looked at the cake. It was a leaning tower of batter covered in pink frosting that dripped down the sides. Random candles were stuck all over it, some crooked, some lying on the cake itself. This is the ugliest thing I've ever seen, Arya said, then burst out laughing. And it's perfect, Ethan smiled, flour in his hair and a streak of frosting on his face. I know I promised never to cook again, but technically Theo was supervising. I helped, Theo confirmed proudly. I cracked the eggs and dropped half the shells in, Ethan added, but we fished them all out, I think. Arya crossed her arms, trying not to laugh even more. So, there's a chance I'll chip a tooth on an eggshell, a small one, Ethan admitted, very small. Arya shook her head and walked over to them, hugging them both. Thank you. You two are crazy. We learn from the best, Ethan said, kissing the top of her head. They sang Happy Birthday with Theo purposely singing off-key to make Arya laugh. When they finished, Ethan lit the candles. Make a wish, Theo urged. Arya looked at the candles, then at Ethan and Theo. She closed her eyes and thought, let this never end. She blew out all the candles at once. Theo clapped his hands. Now cut the cake. Arya picked up the knife. But before she could slice it, Ethan took her hand. Wait, there's something. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Arya felt her heart stop. Ethan, wait, there's something. Theo was bouncing next to him, barely able to contain his excitement. Arya Bennett, Ethan began. His voice full of emotion, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. You celebrated with me, with us. Arya Bennett, Ethan began. His voice full of emotion. A year ago, your wish was not to celebrate alone, and you didn't. Forever until we're old with gray hair, arguing about who forgot to buy milk. Arya laughed through her tears. So Ethan took a deep breath. Will you marry me? For a second, Arya couldn't speak. She just looked at the man in front of her. The man who'd once been so cold and who now stood there covered in flour with a crooked cake beside him, and his heart wide open. Yes, she finally said, her voice shaky. Yes, I do. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger and pulled her into a kiss full of love, of promises of a future. Theo cheered with joy and jumped on top of them, making all three fall into a messy hug. When they pulled apart, Arya had flour on her face and chocolate syrup on her shirt. Ethan wasn't in better shape now, with frosting in his hair. "We're a mess," Arya said, laughing. "The best mess in the world." Ethan agreed. Theo tugged at Arya's sleeve. "So now, can I be the ring bearer at the wedding?" Arya and Ethan looked at each other and laughed. "Of course you can," Arya assured him. "You're going to be the cutest ring bearer ever." "I'm going to practice," Theo declared. "I'll walk really slow and won't drop the rings." Ethan tousled his son's hair. "You'll be perfect, champ." 3 months later, on a sunny spring morning, Arya was in a room getting ready for the wedding. Vivian was adjusting her veil with care. "You look beautiful, dear," the woman said, eyes misty. "Thank you, Vivian." Arya held her hand. "For everything. For believing in me. For not letting Ethan lose me." Vivian smiled. "You saved my family, Arya. You brought life where there was only coldness. I should be thanking you." A soft knock on the door interrupted them. Theo walked in wearing a little suit and holding the ring pillow like it was the most precious treasure in the world. "Arya, you look like a princess, and you look like a prince." She knelt down to his level. "Ready?" "Yes, I practiced last night. Watch." Theo walked slowly across the room in exaggerated slow motion. Arya and Vivian laughed. "Perfect." Arya approved. The music started. It was time. Arya walked down the aisle to the garden where the ceremony would take place. There were flowers everywhere, friends and family seated. But she only had eyes for Ethan. He stood at the altar in a gray suit, eyes fixed on her. Arya walked down the aisle to the garden where the ceremony would take place. That smile Arya had grown to love, the one that didn't appear often, but meant more than 1,000 words. Theo walked ahead of her, holding the pillow with all the seriousness of an adult, but tripped over his own foot and almost dropped the rings. He caught them just in time and looked back with a relieved smile. The guests left, and Theo continued his triumphant walk. When Arya reached the altar, Ethan took her hand. "You look beautiful," he whispered. "You too, and no flower this time." It chuckled quietly. The ceremony was short but emotional. They exchanged vows, promising love, partnership, patience with Ethan's cooking attempts, and lots of dinosaur-shaped pancakes. When the priest said, "You may kiss the bride," the guests left, and Theo continued his triumphant walk. The guests applauded. Theo shouted, "Yay," from the crowd. Vivian discreetly wiped away tears. At the reception, Arya and Ethan danced their first dance. It wasn't perfect. He stepped on her foot twice, but it was theirs. At the reception, Arya and Ethan danced their first dance. "So, Mrs. Harlow," Ethan said as they twirled, "how do you feel?" "Like I hit the jackpot," Arya replied, "but like the life jackpot, not the money one, because you already hit that before meeting me." Ethan laughed. "I hit the real jackpot when you walked into my life with those ridiculous flip-flops." "Hey, don't talk bad about my flamingos." "Never. I love them just like I love you." Arya rested her head on his shoulder. "I love you too." And there, in the middle of the celebration, surrounded by people who love them, Arya knew this was just the beginning. The beginning of a life full of laughter, messes, lopsided pancakes, made-up Uno rules, and love. So much love,